do.
Well, and I think, as you say, that was probably about the only thing I saw more solid was your retreat from Gettysburg. And you're just one of those people, you write a book and it's hard to put it down once you start reading it, because it always flows well, and you always want to turn and see what the next page says. And
Thank you.
I can't say much nicer things about that, and it's especially difficult to say that to a slinky mink. I mean, gosh, what a hairy, awesome thing. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to swallow that. You saw what they did to Moss Robert today in Richmond, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. That's sad thing.
I couldn't believe they publicly cut him up in front of the people too. I mean, it's one thing to take him down. It was something entirely different to sever him off at the torso and all this other stuff so they could cart him away. I'll never forgive Richmond, and I'll never forgive that carpetbagger who was the governor of Virginia who went to VMI.
Yeah, no, I feel the same, Len. I feel the same.
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. So, looking good. The other thing, Kent, that you'll see, of course, is we record this and we'll pop it up, and it will be on our YouTube channel and so forth to allow people to get more of a sense as to what your book's about. We get good viewership on that site. Not anything like you're getting on Witnessing History, but pretty damn good. So we'll enjoy that a great deal.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm happy to be here, Len.
I'm so glad to have you back too.
I got bailed out at the last minute by my friend Neil Rush.
Send you a message
this afternoon.
Well, what happened in Lexington? Is it just it's just across the board? Did you all have an electrical storm or something? Hello? Karen, looks like he froze up.
Yeah, he froze up.
I don't know if he can, when he freezes up, can he hear us talking?
I'm not sure. Let me try and send a message.
Okay, he is going to come back in. I see he's just left.
Yeah.
And when he comes back in, I will start the administrative announcements.
Well, you want to go ahead and start those now?
Yeah, and you can let him in, and then when he comes back on. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Len Rydell, the Executive Director of the Blue and Gray Education Society, and I'd like to welcome you to Heavens. I think this is our 25th or 26th interview in our YouTube series, which we started back in January. We have found ourselves scrambling quite a bit with COVID, but having gotten most of our programs done and interviews related to those programs done, we've had some really excellent books have come out recently, not the least of which is Gordon Ray's book that we spoke about 2 weeks ago, and now Kent's book, which just came out of the UNC Press, that you can see on the screen there in front. Kent and I have known each other for a lot of years. we go all the way back to about 88 and 87 in the old Civil War Society when he was the editor of Civil War or Virginia's Civil War, and we met at that time, and we have been good and close friends ever since. What you will see, there are some new people on here who have not been with us before. What we will do is Kent and I are going to have a conversation starting at 8 o'clock. And let me see, have you gotten Kent back up again?
No.
Okay, this could be him calling me. Hold on. Yeah, he is. Hold on a second. Hey, Kent. Can you hear us though? You can't hear anything of what we're talking. Can you zoom back in? Can you log back into the meeting? Yeah, I saw you freeze up and then you locked out, and then I saw that you all left the meeting. So try to join the meeting again. Okay. For those of you guys who are listening to my administratives, we dropped Kent temporarily. He's at law offices in Cynthiana, and he's trying to log back in right now. So I'm chatting with him until we get him back in. So
Here he comes.
okay, we see him. We see you coming back in. As soon as we get you in, we'll see if we get a video and audio, and then I'll continue on. I've just started administrative.
With computer on.
All right.
Give him a second.
Okay, I hear him again. Let's see if we can get a handsome face, and then I'll continue on.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Len?
I do hear you, Kent. I don't see you yet, but I do hear you.
Let's see.
Oh, it says.
Yeah, you've got to start your video.
Well,
It says, yeah, your video is started. Wait, down here. No, that says stop. Maybe start and then stop. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
Okay,
Got it.
thank you. Got
There
it.
we go. Thank you.
Have we got him back again?
Yes.
Okay, Kent, communications check. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Okay, fine. I'm going to continue with my announcements, and you guys do whatever you have to do.
Okay.
As I say, I've known Kent for, oh heavens, it's probably been 30 years now, and we have gone back and forth all the way back to the days of the Civil War Society, and have always gone back and forth. He went to Washington Lee Law School, and I went to VMI, so we had quite a bit of fun jousting over the years about that. And now, in the ultimate revenge, Kent's youngest son has just become a rat at VMI this year, and just matriculated a couple of weeks ago. So 4 years of unadulterated grief is coming your way, Brown. Make no mistake. It's how it needs to be. So anyway, what I wanted to tell you all was that if you are new to this, we take this series, and it's all on our YouTube channel, of which there are over 30 different announcements now. I think that if you haven't signed up for it, certainly you should, because it will give you a good access to a lot of the stuff that we're doing. In addition to that, if you are an active member of the Blue and Gray and you haven't yet signed up for access to our video archive series, we've put up just under 250 of them now. The lectures go back all the way back to 1994. And we're just putting them up online as a means of saving them for posterity, since we have recorded so much stuff over the 27 years or so of our existence. So what you will see with there, and I'm trying for you all to look at. So
Yeah, the blue and gray should be up online. Everybody should be able to see it.
I don't see a thing.
Telling you that we're seeing his desktop.
I don't
No,
see a thing there.
Okay.
Okay, well, I will go in advance beyond that. Oh, here you go. Okay. So when you go to the BGS website, you'll see the video archives there. If you are a member and you don't have your sign in, you need to get a hold of me. That will allow you to go access the more than 250 lectures that we already have online that go back all the way back to 1994. We even have some lectures that Kent Brown. Kent, do you remember the time that you did Jefferson Davis's farewell speech in the well of the old Capitol building in Jackson back in 1996? We have that in the archives. It's a wonderful remembrance. So you would see that. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Kent's new book, Meade, Study in Command. And this is, quite frankly, every once in a while you get books that come along that are compelling by nature of their subject, and then they are absolutely spot on in what they do. And in this case, if you want to know what this book is about, the title is what it's about. And it is a disciplined approach. If you want to know about Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg, this is not the book to read. This is about George Gordon Meade and his tenure of command that goes through Gettysburg and the retreat at Gettysburg. And it is exactly what the title says it is. And it's a superb work. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to chat with Kent about that. Kent, good evening. What I'd like to get into before we get into the book, though, is I wanted to ask you a little bit about witnessing history and the work that you've been doing there. Have been so impressed with both your Daniel Boone work as well as your episode on bourbon and Henry Clay in between. Tell us a little something about witnessing history and what's your purpose in doing all that.
It is a 501c3 public charity, and its purpose is to finance and produce documentary films on American history. We don't even have to talk about how little American history is being taught these days, and how little Americans know about American history. So the object of our productions is to film a story that we can broadcast. These have to be broadcast, and PBS is where we broadcast them. Kentucky Educational Television is our partner, and that's a very large member of the 247 affiliates of PBS. They always broadcast our films, and then they send them to the National Educational Telecommunications Association, that then makes them available to all 247 of the PBS networks. We also post them on YouTube on our own website. Now, the way we make the film is that we use actors, actresses to portray significant scenes we want people to see. Most people in this country don't know enough about American history to even conjure up in their mind what anything may have looked like. For instance, Daniel Boone's defense of Boonesboro, coming through the Cumberland Gap. Most people just can't even figure out what that might look like. And if you portray it in a manner that is as accurate as we can get in terms of the clothing, the looks, everything of these people, then people will watch these films and be then entertained by them. because they actually see the events unfold in front of them. And so we've made 11 films over the years. We're in the midst of producing one now, raising the capital for it, on the coming of the American Revolution. But among our really fun titles is Daniel Boone and the Opening of the American West, a 2-hour film in which the fellow who portrays Daniel Boone not only knows a great deal about him, but he looks just like Daniel Boone's description.
Really?
Recently, our most recent film we released was a film called In the Declaration, All Men Are Created Equal, Abraham Lincoln in Illinois, 1830 to 1860. It takes him all the way up to the presidential race. And you can go on the Witnessing History Education Foundation YouTube channel, and we have over 2,300,000 views of these films. And people make these comments all the time, how much they love it and how much they like watching this. They didn't know this happened. I think we got like 17 comments from descendants of Daniel Boone and his brothers and sisters. And so, and then what we do is we produce teacher guides that we post on the PBS Learning Media channel. We have an expert prepare the guides. We chunk the films into 10 and 12-minute segments so that a teacher can show that 10 or 12-minute segment, and then there's a guide to go along with that segment. So it discusses vocabulary, all kinds of things, so that they actually teach. And the first film we've gotten up for teachers is Daniel Boone. And we have, right now, 14,000 teachers have used that film. And that, if you have a class of 30, well, you can multiply it out and see just how many students have gotten to do that. And everything we do is free. We're a charity. When they get that free, we don't get a dime. We raise the revenue for this, which is not easy. But, you know, we're hitting a great chord out there.
A dirge for the brave old pioneer, old druid of the West. His offering was the fleet wild deer, his shrine the mountain's crest. Within his wildwood temple's space, an empire's towers nod, where erst, along of all his grace, he knelt to nature's God. A dirge for the brave old pioneer, Columbus of the land, who guided freedom's proud career beyond the conquered strand, and gave her pilgrim sons a home no monarch's step profanes, free as the chainless winds that roam upon its boundless plains.
Hello, I'm Kent Masterson Brown. Welcome to Witnessing History's Daniel Boone and the Opening of the American West. Daniel Boone. His name is known throughout the world. Numerous poems, biographies, articles, movies, and even television serials have been produced about him. His modern image is of a man who was bigger than life, who wore buckskins and a coonskin hat, and who was the first white man to explore and settle Kentucky. Yet Daniel Boone was anything but what the popular culture portrays. He was not the first white man to explore or even settle Kentucky. He despised fur hats, preferring broad-brimmed hats instead. He led the effort to clear a path through the wilderness, over part of which no fewer than 300,000 settlers would follow to the American West. Indeed, to settle what became Kentucky was his dream, and he lost 2 sons and a brother and other family members in the effort. On more than one occasion, his wife and family had given him up for dead. He was court-martialed for treason by his fellow settlers, but a jury acquitted him.
For multiple reasons, he sold or otherwise conveyed every piece of property he ever claimed in Kentucky. He was a profoundly humble man who had a deep faith in God that sustained him. He paved the way for civilization and in the end moved away from that which he helped create. Join me as we explore the life of one of America's most authentic and remarkable men, Daniel Boone.
Well, they're wonderful works. They're absolutely wonderful works. And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with Witnessing History, it's I think it's witnessinghistory.com and go look at it.
Witnessinghistory.org.
Sorry, witnessinghistory.org. And you'll find them compelling. Like I say, the one I found the most rewarding of all was bourbon in Kentucky history. That was,
we haven't made teacher guides for that yet. No.
No, but that's one that I would certainly like to have a field study on. You know, so we should just load up with those. But skipping ahead, let's move on to the Civil War. That's the common ground that we've lived on and worked with all these so many years. I remember the very first time meeting up with you was at the Civil War Society at a second Manassas symposium in way back in about 1988 or so, and I think we struck it off as friends at that time, and ever since then we both kind of lived parallel tracks in the Civil War and in American history. And so when I first saw your work on Lee at Gettysburg, that seemed really right down the middle. Lee's retreat from Gettysburg. It was the book that needed to be written because for years and years and years, nobody did the retreat from Gettysburg. You know, the battle stopped after July 3rd, and that was it. But then the other thing that we did as an organization over the years was we did a Scapegoats of Gettysburg, and over 7 years, we took Meade and Sickles and Stewart and Longstreet and Ewell and so forth and Lee, and we broke apart in multi-date studies what their role was in the battlefield. And so when you came up with this book, Meade, A Study in Command at Gettysburg, it was like, wow, what has Kent got to say about this? What was it that got you fascinated with George Gordon Meade?
Researching and writing Retreat from Gettysburg. That was entirely about that operation of getting out of Pennsylvania and Maryland and back to Virginia. And that was the whole book, of course. And in order to make that story understandable, you have to also cover George Meade and the Army of the Potomac. So you know what Meade was doing in response to Lee's operations and what Lee would do in response to Meade. And I gained a healthy respect for George Meade in writing Retreat from Gettysburg. I said, this man didn't, I don't know how many out in this audience, you mentioned George Meade and everybody says, oh yes, he's the one that didn't pursue Lee. He's the one that let Lee cross the Potomac River. I immediately came to the conclusion, writing that book, that that's not so. That is simply not so. Meade actually confronted Lee down there. And his efforts to get from Gettysburg to Frederick and Middletown, and then from Frederick and Middletown to the site in front of St. James College, south of Hagerstown, was an absolutely remarkable effort. He did that in a matter of 4 days. He covered 64 miles in driving rains and some places knee-deep mud. And it's a remarkable story. And I felt this is something that we just haven't talked about before. And so right on the heels of retreat from Gettysburg, Chapel Hill asked me, "Are you want to do something else?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "What is it?" And I said, "George Meade." And that was about 2006. And so, I mean, I was actively practicing law at the time. It took me a while to go out and find the archival material necessary for that. And but over the ensuing years, I concentrated on that until we got it done. I'll say this: the one thing that I got out of that was a kind of a godsend in this was the COVID disaster, only because it kept me on my dining room table with all my manuscripts stacked up around me, nonstop writing the book. And this is in 2020 mostly, although I've been writing it before then, but just serious concentration. I couldn't do anything else because there was, you couldn't do anything else. We had a total lockdown here.
Sure.
I just worked on a book until I got it done.
Now, let me ask you, when George Meade, what I found really fascinating was your discussion right at the start of Meade being directed to take command. I'd like to just ask you to reach back even a little bit, a week or so before that. Were Meade and the other Corps commanders, did you find that they had lost faith in Hooker? Did they expect Hooker to be relieved, or did this come like a thunderbolt in the middle of the night?
No, I think the Army of the Potomac was its high command was in a state of kind of being demoralized after the fighting at Chancellorsville and the ensuing campaign north. I have to give Hooker credit in this, that he moved that army with incredible speed from Falmouth to Frederick. But the Corps commanders of the Army had lost total faith in him. And Meade even said that to his wife in a letter, that they have simply lost faith in him. And Meade was very honest about things with Margaretta, his wife. And so the answer to your question is yes, they were demoralized and disenchanted with Hooker. Can you all see me all right? Is everything looking all right, Len?
Yeah, I've got a good view of you.
Okay.
The volume is a little. One person noted that they were having a little difficulty hearing you, but I can hear you okay, and
Okay.
it should.
I'll talk louder.
Okay, that may help a little bit.
Okay.
So did Meade actually seriously think that he might be a candidate to command the Army, or do you think that he thought perhaps Reynolds was a more likely candidate?
Well, he actually told Reynolds that he thought Reynolds was the likely candidate. And he said that to him when Reynolds came and visited him on the evening he was named commander of the Army. And Reynolds turned to him and said, "No, George, I mean, you're the one who needs to be the commander of the Army, not me." And but did Meade think he would be named commander? Not really. Did he want to be named commander? Yes, he did. He makes no bones about that with his wife. Now, he didn't tell anybody else that, but his letters to his wife are spectacular, and they give you a lot of depth for George Meade, what kind of a man he was. He very much wanted to become commander of the Army of the Potomac in many ways. In many ways, he dreaded it. That poor Army had a horrible record up to then, horrible. One thing I did in the book was put a introduction to it, where I go through the brief history of the Army of the Potomac. And it's incredible. In 26 months, first 26 months of the Civil War, they had not won anything. Nothing. They had been defeated in every engagement, and if not defeated, routed. And in one engagement, we call it kind of a draw, but it was so bloody and so ugly that even though Lee left the field first, it took weeks before George Meade would dare step foot anywhere else. That's as close as they got. Of course, that's Antietam. That's as close as they got. But in 26 months, other than that, they hadn't won a battle at all. And they were racking up casualties everywhere. Hence, in March of 63, what does Lincoln administration and Congress do but pass a draft? Drafts are totally unpopular. But who wants to volunteer for an army like this? I mean, they just get battle casualties in the newspapers and losses.
Well, how does Meade rise to the top? Why is Meade ordered to take command of the army over anybody else, in your opinion?
I think that the best way to put it is that Meade came to the Lincoln and Edwin Stanton and Halleck as being highly recommended by people like John Reynolds. Reynolds and Meade did have a special relationship. They were very close, came up through the Pennsylvania Reserves together, commanding brigade and commanding the division. Reynolds wanted no part of being commander of that army. And he even made the comment that I don't want to take command of an army and take care of all of Hooker's and Burnside's leavings. Kind of a harsh thing to say. And that's when he said, you deserve it, George. You should be commander. I don't want to take care of their leavings. And they left behind a very sorry record and an army that you wonder, is this army capable of doing anything? It hadn't shown it was. And so to become commander of that army put the commander in a position of not only trying to defeat this enemy that had invaded Maryland and Pennsylvania, but to actually reconfigure this army such that it could fight. I mean, imagine the task. These people hadn't won anything. Imagine their mental state, their emotional state was not someone you think you can do it. And that's why after the fighting at Gettysburg, Meade wrote to Margaret and said, these men have finally learned what it is to be soldiers.
You know,
it's proud of them. Yeah.
You know, what's fascinating to me as well, and I guess it's easy enough to see, given the history of the change of commands in the Army of the Potomac, it's easy to understand why Meade wasn't asked to take command. He was told
he was
ordered. He had to take command.
Yeah, he had. You're absolutely right, Len. He wasn't. He didn't. They didn't come to him and say, George, we'd like to have you. They told him under no uncertain terms in writing that we order you to be commander. And the fellow who was delivering the record, the orders to him said, Meade told him, he says, no, I don't really want to do this. And he was told, listen, these orders are peremptory. You cannot decline. So they made him take command. That's how bad the situation had gotten.
And you know, the other fascination of that was that the straw that broke Hooker's back, demanding the control of the forces at Harper's Ferry and elsewhere, which was denied to him. Not only does Meade get ordered to take command, but he receives a bunch of fairly extraordinary liberties to put people in command and do things without regard to seniority or dates of rank or whatever. It's really a rather remarkable charter to receive, along with his operational orders to protect DC and Baltimore.
Right, right. No, it is. You wonder whether, and I just asked the question in the book, was Lincoln and Halleck and Stanton trying to get Hooker to just get out, and by denying him the use of the garrison at Harper's Ferry. And I don't know, and I wouldn't even want to speculate. I just asked the question. But immediately after Meade was named, I mean, he was given command of that garrison. He could do with it what he wished. Absolutely. And,
You know, the other fascination, which I'd like you to address, I am just absolutely, I had some personal experience, not at that level before, but the activities that surround somebody when they are put in a position of replacing somebody who's ostensibly been fired. I found that portion of your book most instructive because it gave you a sense as to how a person who is the commander has to prioritize tasks and so forth. And I think it would be useful for the group here if you might address some of the things that you were most impressed with about Meade's actions as soon as he accepts the command.
well, you know, he actually thought when the courier showed up to tell him that he had something for him, that he was under arrest. He told that to his wife. He said, I thought they were going to arrest me. I mean, they'd been known to do that before, the commanders of those armies. And the fact that he was told, no, you've been named commander of the Army of the Potomac, came as almost a shock to me. And he says, no, I don't want to do this. Reynolds should be it. They said, no, it's peremptory. You've got to take it. So from there, Meade goes to Hooker. And I've got to say, you cannot find anyone more the gentleman about this than George Meade was when he went up to Hooker. And we don't know a lot about what they said in the tent, but it's evident from all the other parts of this we know that Meade was very empathetic with about Joe Hooker. I think as a fellow officer, he respected Hooker. I think he didn't like some of the company Hooker kept,
Sure.
and he made that known to his wife, that I don't like some of the company he keeps. But nevertheless, he understood how devastating a change like that was to Hooker. And they were together for a long time that afternoon. And he had Hooker go through all the maps with him, where all the elements of the army were, all this. And then at the end, he went out of the tent with Hooker when Hooker said goodbye to all the principal officers that had gathered there. And that's a tough thing for anybody to deal with. And I don't think anyone showed more respect or more empathy for Hooker than George Meade did.
Now, for years and years, the Pipe Creek Circular, I think, has been really bandied around, and I think most people who bandy it around have used it to color their arguments pro or anti-Meade, but they also, I think, don't really understand what this is supposed to be about. And I was wondering if you might address the role of the Pipe Creek Circular in Meade's assumption of command.
While she's working on it, we must always remember that George Meade was admonished from the very beginning in his orders from the War Department that he was to protect, as you said earlier, Baltimore and Washington. That's what you do. Other than, you've got to make sure you do that, but beyond that, you can do what you wish, but you've got to make sure Baltimore and Washington are. So the purpose of the Pipe Creek line is to do precisely what the orders from the War Department, Halleck, and the president commanded him to do, and that is protect Baltimore and Washington. If you look at this map and you see Pipe Creek, it's done in a black. You see Pipe Creek going from Manchester to Union Mills to just below Taneytown and to Middleburg. That line Meade observed after he moved his army north on the 29th of June from Frederick. And remember, this guy has been in command only since, the afternoon of the 28th, really, in reality. But already he's got this, on the night of the 29th, he's got this army all the way up to that site. And I walked the Pipe Creek line from Manchester to Union Mills. The bluffs are almost 100 feet above the creek. This is on the south bank. They begin to decline as you move west. They go from there to 50 feet and then down to much less as they enter into the Monocacy River. But nevertheless, it is a formidable ground to defend. I'll give you a great story. This is not in my book, but it's one I love to tell. I had a friend once lived in Frederick who was a great friend of an old fella in Westminster who used to give battlefield tours for Civil War Times Illustrated way back in the 50s and 60s. And he lived near Union Mills. And in fact, he was a Shriver. And he called him up once and said, this old fella called my friend up and said, would you like to come on over? I got a guest coming today. And he said, I was just a young boy. And I said, no, I can't. I got to cut the lawn or something mundane like that. Anyway, later on that day, the old fella called him up and said, I'm sorry you didn't get here. My guest was Dwight Eisenhower. And he wanted to walk with me on the Pipe Creek line. So I took him on the Pipe Creek line. And he told me that it's just too bad Meade was not able to defend the line here. One, he would have won a victory without question. But number two, the casualties would not be near what happened at Gettysburg. Indeed, I mean, the Pipe Creek line is astonishing. His object was to, all along, and we've often heard that the Pipe Creek line was a contingency. I've heard a lot of historians say, well, it's a contingency. He could fall back to the Pipe Creek line as a contingency. As of June 30 and July 1, until the afternoon of July 1, this was not only not a contingency to George Meade, it was his plan, period. And make no mistake about it. In fact, on the morning of July 1, while John Reynolds was engaged at Gettysburg, and Meade would not know about that engagement for hours, George Meade was riding the Pipe Creek line with Henry Hunt, General Hunt, with Governor Warren, his chief engineer, for the purpose of assigning positions to all the respective corps along the Pipe Creek line. Then on later that afternoon, or rather after he got back from riding the Pipe Creek line, he wrote a letter to General Reynolds. Reynolds commanded the left wing of the army at the time Marsh Creek, just north of Emmitsburg. Behind him at Emmitsburg was Howard's 11th Corps. And moving there that day was the 3rd Corps, Sickles. And on the first day, on June 30, General Meade wrote a letter. Now I got to tell you, this is a letter. It's not an order. It's General Reynolds. He talks about your dispatches received, et cetera, et cetera. And this is on the heels of Meade issuing an order to Reynolds to go to Gettysburg. Reynolds would receive that order on the morning of July 1, in the wee hours. It was written on June 30, as was this letter. And this is what Meade says to Reynolds. In case of an advance in force either against you or Howard at Emmitsburg, you must fall back to that place. And I will reinforce you from the corps nearest to you, which are Sickles at Taneytown and Slocum's at Littlestown. Now, this is before he issues the Pipe Creek Circular, of course. And he wants Reynolds to move forward to Gettysburg. He doesn't intend at all for it to be a place to be defended. In fact, here's what Meade tells him in this same letter. He starts off with the word, please get all the information you can and post yourself up in the roads and routes of communication of the enemy. Get all the information you can and post yourself up in the roads and routes of communication of the enemy. What's the roads and routes of communication of the enemy? It's the Chambersburg Pike. The road that runs from Chambersburg to Cashtown to Gettysburg and on to York. And that road, the reason Meade is conscious of that is that he has been seeing, from what intelligence Hooker showed him and what intelligence he's been getting since he's been in command, that all of Lee's corps are either along that turnpike, west of Gettysburg or east of Gettysburg, or just north of that turnpike. That must be kind of the axis on which Lee's army is operating. So he's saying to Reynolds, get up on that axis and get me all the information you can. Now you kind of go, what kind of an operation is this? Well, it's an operation referred to by Dennis Hart Mahan, Clausewitz, Jomini as the operational use of an advanced corps. Send 1/5 to 1/7 of the army forward and try to get into a position where the enemy will congregate in front of you. One of the problems Meade complains about all the time is the lack of information of the positions of the enemy. Now you think, what does it take to get him information? Well, someone's got to spot something, and then they've got to get back to him. Well, Gettysburg's 14 miles from Taneytown, Meade's headquarters, on July 1. And what does it take to go 14 miles? Well, for instance, John Reynolds went down with a wound in the back of the head, killed him instantly. And that was around 10:30, 10:45 in the morning of July 1. And it wasn't until nearly 2 o'clock that Meade learned that Reynolds had been badly wounded or dead. They had a rider admonished to wear the leather off that saddle to get there. But yet, even then, that's how long it took for Meade to learn what happened. And but even before Meade learns of Reynolds' situation, he not only, as you can see in the map, he not only has ordered Reynolds forward to Gettysburg, but look, he's ordered Sykes's 5th Corps to Hanover. That is a significant distance, some 14 miles from Union Mills. He's ordered the 6th Corps to Manchester. Now, are these guys supposed to bring on a general engagement? No, they're supposed to do the same thing under the Pipe Creek Circular that Meade ordered Reynolds to do. Get on their roads of communication, which they all will be. If the enemy tries to congregate in front of you and attack you, fall back. And where do they fall back? They fall back to Pipe Creek. And Pike Creek Circular, the one thing Meade does that changes the situation for Reynolds is that instead of Reynolds falling back to Emmitsburg, he orders him in the Pike Creek Circular to fall back to Middleburg, go back to Taneytown and then to Middleburg. But Sykes's 5th Corps is to fall back from Hanover to Union Mills. And so what every corps in the Army has a designated spot along Pike Creek to defend. And they're all spelled out in the Pike Creek Circular. It's a magnificent order, really. But it tells you precisely the mode of operation of armies in the mid-19th century. And by the way, I have spoken, one of my great friends is General Richard Treffry. He's a lieutenant general, retired. He's a honors graduate of West Point. Was former inspector general of the Army. He and I talk a lot about Civil War. He lives in Virginia, but a wonderful man. He loves history. But I told him about Meade's Pike Creek Circular and about the idea of sending out an advance corps and luring the enemy to congregate in front of you. Now you got information you can tell the commander. Guess who's in my front? And you'd send riders back to the commander and say, we've spotted this, they're congregating in front of me. So now Meade has an idea of where this enemy is. And that's its whole purpose. Up to this point in time, Meade had only a glimpse of where that enemy was and had no idea of its intentions. And the object here is to show both what it's doing, and its intentions. I asked this General Treffry that, and he says, Kent, that is still doctrine in the United States Army. We still do that. Even with satellite images, all this, we still do this. Because satellites won't cause the enemy to collect in front of you. Advanced corps will. And he says, we still do it. Fascinating.
What's fascinating is that once Reynolds develops Lee's force, and I suspect certainly that perhaps a different decision may have been made if Reynolds does not go down. But nonetheless, the rapid transition, sending Hancock forward, deputizing him to make the decision as to where the Army will fight as he transitions, Meade finds himself committed to Gettysburg late in the day of the 1st of July. And then I think what fascinates me is that once he comes up, is the level of activity as he aligns and then realigns his corps as they arrive to respond to the threat on his front, on his right, and on his left. Would you like to talk about Lee's or Meade's management of his army over the 2nd and the 3rd day at Gettysburg?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Let me close on this other matter, though, and that is people often ask, why didn't that work for Reynolds? What happened to cause the catastrophe of he being killed and the 1st Corps and the 11th Corps ultimately being demolished? Everyone, including Dennis Hart Mahan, Meade's instructor and one to whom Meade owed a lot of his military thinking, every one of them said that in order for those units, those corps to be effective, you have to use as large a force as you can. 1/5 of the Army should go forward, at least. Reynolds would be 1/7 of the Army. And you've got to use everything, all your infantry, all your cavalry, use and field artillery. And what happened, though, if you follow the story of Reynolds, he's kind of an impulsive fellow. He leaves Marsh Creek with only 1 division of his 3. And that's the 1st Division. And the other 2 divisions followed more than an hour behind. And when Meade gets to Gettysburg, Buford is already in a fight. For what reason he got himself into a fight out there, I just can't begin to talk about. I mean, it baffles my imagination. His position, his role was not to get himself involved in that, and it was only to report, seek, see, and report. And but he's in a fight, and Reynolds goes to his aid with this one division, and of course, there's a tragedy out there. And it takes the other two divisions more than an hour to get even to Gettysburg to get in place. And as a consequence, to wrap it up, both the First Corps, then followed by the 11th Corps, are demolished. I mean, it's a crisis. It's a disaster. And they fall back to the heights east and south of Gettysburg. And interestingly, Meade did send, of course, Hancock forward. But before he did that, he sent the entire Second Corps forward. And Hancock gave the command to John Gibbon, and they moved forward from Taneytown for what purpose? And that was this: in the Pipe Creek Circular, Meade instructed Reynolds to fall back to Middleburg, not Emmitsburg, as his orders of June 30 were. And his fear was that Reynolds, once he got the only way to get the information to him is to send an entire corps out there in the field for him to fall back onto. So the Second Corps went forward for one purpose and one purpose only, was to make sure that John Reynolds, as he was withdrawing from the fighting, which Meade hoped would happen, just the way the textbook says, that he could fall back on the Second Corps, and the Second Corps would then take him to Taneytown and then to Middleburg. And of course, didn't happen. Reynolds was killed. Disaster out there. And Lee, I keep calling Lee, Meade then sends Winfield Hancock forward to tell him what he thinks ought to happen. And you'll see that Meade then decides by the late afternoon of July 1 to bring the entire army to Gettysburg. And for purposes of my story of George Meade in the book, what makes this important is that on July 1, Meade was not only dealing with where he wanted all these various corps positioned and where he wanted them to fall back, but he had also set up his supply base at Westminster and Union Bridge. And you can see both of those towns. Westminster is just south of Union Mills, and Union Bridge is just west of Westminster. Both of them are on the rail line of the Western Maryland Railroad that goes to those towns from Baltimore. And Meade had a supply base and an active railroad, only one track, there weren't dual tracks. But he could get his supplies in from Baltimore on the railroad. Okay, well, you all can see how the Fifth Corps is moving from Hanover west. The Sixth Corps is moving from Manchester toward Westminster. Then it'll move up toward Union Mills, and then you can see the movement of the Second Corps from Taneytown toward Gettysburg. This is Meade's order telling them all to go to Gettysburg after he was informed that Hancock believed it could be defended. But the tough thing for Meade and for his army is that the Pipe Creek line would be only 7 miles ahead of Westminster, the base of supply, and Union Bridge. And that made that supply base really doable. Once that army had to go to Gettysburg, Westminster was 22 miles in the rear. And now supplies can get through on 22 miles. But sadly, as we'll see in the next map, if you go to 15.1, Okay, this is just a shot of the Meade's defense lines at Gettysburg. And you can see on the attack, this is afternoon, the evening of July 2nd and the morning of July 3rd, the attacks of Early's division, of Johnson's division of Ewell's Corps against Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. And notice where the Baltimore Pike is. It runs along Cemetery Hill and it runs along the reverse face of Culp's Hill. And for that reason, the Baltimore Pike was virtually shut down. And it was shut down the entire time Meade's army was there on July 2nd and July 3rd. Now, people say, well, you know, they can get along. No, not really. When Meade took command of the army on June 28th, that army was virtually shoeless. All the marching from Falmouth, Virginia to Maryland had just taken the shoes off the feet. By the time Meade, he gets the command June 28th, by the time he reaches Taneytown, he will have sent out orders to General Montgomery Meigs in Washington, the chief quartermaster of the army, for 51,000 pair of shoes. Now that just shows the shoe problem. In order to keep an army in the field, you also got to feed men. You got to feed them something. They get weak if they're not fed. They can go for a while with nothing, but they can't go very far and they won't be very effective. With the horses and mules, though, it's quite a different story. If you don't feed a mule and a horse every day what they need, they grow weak, they grow lame, and they collapse. The Army regulations in 1861 required a horse to be fed 14 pounds of oats and 14 pounds of hay a day. Now, Meade has roughly 60,000 horses in that army, pulling artillery pieces, pulling supply trains, and then mules. He will, in the Battle of Gettysburg, lose about 1,900 horses on the battlefield. That's a lot. But by the time he gets to the Potomac River in the pursuit of Lee, that army will have lost 14,000 horses. These are horses that have just broken down. No food, no fodder, nothing. And one diarist I found, a Pennsylvania soldier, wrote that our horses are really a little blue. Hundreds die every day. Now in mid-19th century warfare, if you can't keep your horses up, your army's dead. It can't move. It's like George Patton's Third Army in Europe. Runs out of fuel. When it runs out of fuel, you're dead.
Sure.
And the idea of making sure an army its men are fed, its men are clothed, shoed, its horses are shoed, its horses are fed. And they got to be fed the right diet, because you can't change a diet on a horse and expect them to eat something else. They go lame. And so all this is critical. Before you even pull the trigger on a battle, you've got to make sure all that works. And you can see right now what imperiled this army in its pursuit. When it pursues Lee, and we'll get to that in detail, it's using animals that just haven't been fed. And it's using men who haven't been fed. All of them, every one of the diarists I came across talked about how hungry they were. And how shoeless they were. And by the way, did he ever get the 51,000 pair of shoes he ordered? No, he never did. Mainly because the Baltimore and Ohio was cut by Jeb Stuart. literally the day before Meade took command. And they took all the bridges down between Baltimore and Relay House in Frederick. And it was shut down. So he didn't get any shoes there. And the rest of the time he ordered shoes, he was in Taneytown. And he never got a shipment there either. So if 50% of the Army of the Potomac was shoeless going into this, imagine what it looked like at the end. Now, this is the Army, by the way, that fights the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's a different looking Army than we've ever imagined. What the irony of this, too, is that they're in their homeland. I mean, this is Pennsylvania. You would think they'd be the most well-fed, well-equipped Army ever because they're on their homeland. But they were far less well off than even the defeated enemy.
You know, when you sit back, and of course I have had the pleasure of just having finished reading your book, and so all this is so fresh to me, and it would be easy for us to talk literally for hours and hours on this, but that's not what we set ourselves up to do. And I think the thing that will be best for us to finish up on is to address your view of the criticisms of Meade as not having conducted an effective pursuit of Lee after the battle, and how you assess his performance in basically 10 days of command, 10 to 12 days of commanding the Army.
Well, I'll tell you, the way I would answer that is to, first of all, talk about the letter that Henry Halleck wrote to him at the end of July after all these events had happened. And that how much, according to Halleck, Meade had commanded this army with such fervor, yielding such success. He said, never has a campaign really in the end been as successful as yours was. And he says, you are the one that we owe the credit for all this. And it was almost like an apology to me for all that had been said about him by people in the White House, Lincoln himself. And of course, those criticisms of Meade stung. And they frankly injured him seriously. Yet Meade, again, took that army on multiple routes toward Frederick and Middletown on July 7th, 6th, and 7th. People ask, well, why did he wait so long before he started to move? And the answer is simple. His orders were to protect Baltimore and Washington. He could not move the Army of the Potomac until he knew that Lee was actually leaving the South Mountain Range and heading into the Cumberland Valley, ultimately to get to the Potomac River. Up to that point in time, when he knew that, he got intelligence from a cavalry brigade that had been accompanying the Sixth Corps, and they finally sent a message back. He's now moving toward Waynesboro, the enemy, which means he's on the other side of the mountains. And with that intelligence, then Meade moved. Now imagine, Meade didn't know what the future would bring. He had no idea what Lee might do next. He just had to resolve in his mind that he was in fact retreating back into the Cumberland Valley into Virginia. And what if Meade just said, no, I'll beat him down there and just go down there to the Potomac. And Lee then turned back and moved east. What if he did? That had to have crossed George Meade's mind. And of course it did cross his mind. That was his fear. So, and of course that would be catastrophic. You fight this battle only to yield Gettysburg back to them? he had to simply make sure, and again, we're talking about reconnaissance and getting the information back to Army headquarters. It takes days sometimes to do that. And, but once Meade knew that Lee was on the move toward the Cumberland Valley, he then moved with as much speed as anybody could muster. Again, in a series of 4 days, he had the Army of the Potomac at Middletown and then over the mountains confronting Lee's defenses on the Downsville line, south of Hagerstown. And you can't ask for anything to move it faster. And you read these diaries and letters of these soldiers, and I mean, they're deep, knee-deep mud, and the rain is coming down in sheets. And of course, we all know they don't have any shoes. We all know that they're starved to death. Their horses are dying all around them. And yet that army gets there. And one thing I recall Edwin Coddington mentioning that I truly endorse, and that is his statement that once Meade got to confront Lee at the Downsville line, it appeared as though he did not have an instrument he could command to do the things he wanted it to do. It just wasn't anything left of him. And no statement was truer. And you can see here why. It shows you the importance of logistics. You've got to be able to feed your people. You got to be able to shoe your horses and feed them. You got to provide ammunition to them. It's really interesting. The horses were down so much, they were taking horses from the supply trains in order to just give them to artillery batteries because they had lost them all during the pursuit. It's a sad tale, but yet kind of a victorious one that Meade was able to get as far as he did. But now to try to attack Lee down there on the Downsville line would have been futile and would have been a disaster, an absolute disaster. And every one of his corps commanders said it, and every one of his corps commanders who visited that Downsville line after Lee evacuated the area said that we could have never defeated him here. So, but Meade, though, received some rather scathing remarks from the White House. And that's when he tendered his resignation, and it was refused. But that began the issues that Meade has faced all these years. And it was overcoming the comments that were made, including the letter Lincoln never sent that he wrote on the 14th of July. And it was really a torching sort of thing, but it was found years after both Lincoln and Meade were dead. But nevertheless, it's been used as fodder for this continuing story of Meade not pursuing and Meade not doing what, not living up to what the president and the War Department wanted him to do. He even wrote his wife in the fall of 1863, Meade did, that sooner or later it will appear that I was not even at Gettysburg. Interestingly, after the book came out, a fellow, and I think he lives in Canada, a collector of all kinds of stuff, but among the things he collects are letters, and he had a Meade letter. And he asked me if I'd be interested in seeing it. I said, of course I'd be interested in seeing it. And it's dated January 27th, 1868. And it's to John Batchelder, Batchelder being the first historian of the Battle of Gettysburg. Right. And the one who collected all the letters and papers of participants in the battle. And let me just read to you one section of this. And this relates to the paucity of information about Meade's whereabouts during the battle. And which is something I tried to address in the book. I kept letting people see what Meade was doing in the battles itself. But here's what Meade wrote, and it's kind of a sad thing. He says, the vagaries of the battle did not permit my keeping in all cases copies of my orders. and the greater part of my orders were made verbally through staff officers. I find the same difficulty in all battles in which I commanded, such as the impracticability of defining my exact position by a written record. It is this fact which causes, as you say, my name to appear so seldom in the elaborate communications that have been made to you by my subordinates, some of whom I am well aware do not desire to mention my name. Nevertheless, if you are of the opinion that the truth of history requires my being ignored in this battle, I do not know any action on my part to remedy this evil. Imagine that.
Isn't that remarkable?
It's just gripping when you think of what he did. You mentioned, about Meade during the battle. And this, of course, is what he's referring to here. But the battle Meade fought, of course, is on July 2nd. And he is the one who was literally, he became the tactical commander of the Army of the Potomac. He was the operational commander, but he became the tactical commander. And this is the fellow who, once he saw what Sickles had done, moving out onto the Emmitsburg Road and then from the Peach Orchard to the foot of Little Round Top, and the exposed position in which he was, his flanks in the air, not supported by anyone, distant from the rest of the army along Cemetery Ridge. Meade, of course, exploded. But he then got hold of himself and just decided to, by God, command this. He goes over literally behind the battle lines near the wheat field, where the Wheatfield Road comes in off of the Taneytown Road. He, from that vantage point, calls upon no less than 5 divisions of the other corps in the army to move into that position to help bolster that line. And he leads each one of them toward that battlefield. It's an astonishing display of courage for an operational commander to be out there doing that is stunning to me. And of course, it was a bloody engagement. I mean, he would lose 12,000 of his own men in this. And people talk about things like the cornfield at Antietam, and I'm a big lover of it's my battlefield of first impression. And there you have 12,000 total casualties. This is 12,000 of Meade's casualties, just in that one sector alone. And when he finally causes those attacks to stop, he then moves on up the lines along Cemetery Ridge, and he's behind every engagement, from Barksdale's attempts to take the Trossel farm. He's right behind there, sending elements of the 12th Corps forward. He then moves on up the line, and he's there right behind where the 1st Minnesota blocks the Confederate attack there, and then moves all the way up into the angle. And there he's there when Ambrose Ransom Wright's brigade is hurled back, and that's where his horse, Old Baldy, was wounded. That bullet passed through one of Meade's trouser legs, entered the horse through the saddle. Meade thought that Baldy was dead, was going to die. But Old Baldy didn't. But Meade himself came that close to a wound at the angle. This guy is a courageous, hard fighter. And really, it's his display, his aggressiveness in bringing one after another. And by the way, he had stripped everything off from the Baltimore Pike almost, except one brigade, and that was old Pop Green's.
Yeah.
Pop Green was reinforced by elements of the 1st and 11th Corps off Cemetery Hill and the western face of Culp's Hill, and was managed to block the attacks on the night of July 2nd. And then ultimately, some of those units came back and bolstered the Culp's Hill line where they met the attack on July 3rd, the morning of July 3rd. But to me, I can't say enough for an operational commander becoming the tactical commander of the Army, as Meade did. That had never been seen in the Army of the Potomac before, and there never was the coordination of units of the various 7 corps of the Army that were more commanded in a collective order than Meade did on the afternoon of July 2nd. Every one of those corps participated in the fighting of every other corps. And they had never seen that in the Army of the Potomac before. And that victory on the Union left is owed entirely really to the troops, but to George Meade. And,
Kent, the thing that strikes me, and being an old military guy myself, I understand that ultimately the commander is the commander, and there is no delegation of responsibility or accountability for what you do on a battlefield. And once you're put on a field in which the life of your army is at stake, it's your responsibility.
Right.
Nobody else's. Everybody subordinate to you is still accountable to you for how you manage that army. I think it's what drives Robert E. Lee into the breach at the Wilderness and at Spotsylvania and elsewhere. It involves his tactical management on the battlefield at Antietam.
yes.
And you're right, with George Meade, this is the first time that we've actually seen a Union commanding officer who is actually engaged in every element of the tactical fight on the field.
Right. It is the counter to Robert E. Lee's efforts at Antietam, where he actually is out on the field, directing one unit after another, getting reinforcements coming in from Harper's Ferry, wherever the hell he could find them, throwing them into the fighting from the cornfield to the sunken road. I mean, it was a day-long effort of he being literally tactically commanding that army. That's a great comparison, Len. I mean, it is.
It's something, as we wrap this up, that's what I said. The thing that I think is so impressive about the work that you've done, of all the books that I've read, and I read about 40 to 50 books a year. It's very, very rare that I ever come along a book that does what it says it's going to do. And your book takes me to the point. I mean, literally, had we had to walk through this book, it had taken us 6 or 7 hours to go through it because of the density of that analysis. And yet the pages turn one after another. And so clearly, I highly recommend this book. We're going to offer that book. I'm going to send it out for folks. You and I talked about it. Love to get you to sign some of these books. We'll send out an announcement so people can get those, and we'll get them to you, because it is a book that people, if you're serious about the war, you got to read it.
Yeah.
You got to read it. It's that good.
What I can do for your folks, Len, is I can give them all my email. They can email me if they want me to sign an insert that we can
A book plate or something, yeah.
Book plate, and I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, we'll see what we can do. I'll get something out probably tomorrow to folks. And Kent, the time flies too fast, and there was so much. We're talking about one of the most remarkable periods in the life of the Army of the Army of the Potomac. And I'm so glad you wrote this book, and even more than that, I'm so thankful that you took the time to write us and talk to us about it. So, Paul, thanks for joining us tonight. Kent, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
And I thank you for being such a good friend for all these years. Thank you. I enjoyed it.